So, first of all, let me thank again our friend Zara, and let me express my personal admiration for what she has been doing. And let me say something more besides this type of gratitude. The more I work with Iranian colleagues, the more I came to really appreciate how proud, intelligent, active are Iranian women in this context. And also the project, which I am briefly showing to you, exploiting your courtesy, your patience, is a project which is to a large extent is due to these two ladies, Zainab Majoub, Leila Keika, were really the motor behind everything. And obviously behind them, there are the male colleagues like Ali Hossein Kavosh, Reza Nasseri, my student Irene Kandana, François Dessay. And I also would like to remember another important colleague of this project, Ali Nasseri, our draftsman, that, as you will see, is really a very good artist. So let me come to some recent developments of the Bronze Age archaeology of Sistan. Okay. First of all, let me remember my friend, Sandro Salvatori, who passed away a few months ago. He was the person who introduced to me the archaeology of Eastern Iran, and with him I really lost a brother, and we all lost one of the best archaeologists which ever worked in Iran. Unfortunately, in the last years, he moved to work in Africa, but his contribution to the archaeology of ancient Iran will never be forgotten. Now, this is our study area, obviously, the Helmand River, the Sistan Basin. The sites of which I am going to speak now are obviously Shari-Sokhte, the big capital of Bronze Age system, and two minor sites which are still finding their way to the archaeological bibliography, Tepe Graziani and Tepe Taleb Khan, which is the subject of this presentation. Now, in 1976 and 1977, before revolution, we were digging, Sandro, Salvatore, and myself, these two sites in the center of Shari-Sokhte. These are the central quarters. Now, this is the area which has been recently excavated by the mission directed by Mansour Sajadi, with the collaboration of Enrico Scalone, who was also a guest of these seminars. And this was the so-called House of the Jars, a small trench open here in this point. This is the map of the trenches and the House of the Jars. It was called like this because of this group of jars and this storage room in this point. This is the section that was recorded at the time, and all the layers here on top, under the foundations of the period 3 monumental buildings, are a big dump of late period 1. In this dump, we found the usual finds that you get in Shari-Sokhte. So dozens and dozens of animal figurines, most of them bulls. As you can see, almost all of them are bulls. We have some sheep like this. This is doubtful. And obviously, human figurines. We have female figurines and male figurines, okay? In a percentage of about 50 to 50%. Nothing new, nothing exceptional. We had a lot of indicators of administrative practices like these ceilings with the imprint of the pole. These are the classical ceilings used to close doors in private dwellings. Some other indicator of less obvious meaning. We had two of these tablets with grooves. I have never seen anything like this before. We suspect that they were using for administration, but we have no proof of it. And at the end, we recorded from these dumps a lot of these so-called small finds. We have spheres, tokens, cones, small wheels. We have beads. All these materials are in unbaked clay. We have beads with different type of elaboration. And a lot of these bicons, okay, that you see here. We didn't know what they were. We just published them because they were there. We wanted to document them, and we assumed that they were playthings, maybe some tokens, and you know, things which really did not find a good context, therefore could not be interpreted in depth. There is an important change in the chronology of Bronze Age system, of which we became aware in the last few years. Now, this is the traditional chronology of Charisocta, which was elaborated by the Italian mission in the 70s. And you know, you all know this type of chronology. We have 4 periods, 10 phases. The maximum moment of development, according to the previous version of the chronology of Bronze Age Sistan, was that period 3 was the peak of urbanization between 24 and 2200 BC, after which period 4, in the last 2 or 3 centuries of the 3rd millennium BC and in the early 2nd millennium, would have witnessed the collapse of urbanization, okay? This is the burnt building, which was the only big excavation dealing with period 4 in Charisocta by Maurizio Tosi. This is the sequence, okay? So period 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you see the collapse of period 4 after 2200 BC. This was the original chronological chart, which was prepared by Sandro Salvatori, selecting a limited number of radiocarbon dates, which fitted very well the original view of this chronology. And you see here, period 3, phase 4, representing a big break in the local sequence of development, okay? Now, we came to 2 different views of this problem, of this reconstruction. On the base of the comparisons between intercultural materials among artifacts, according to the Italians, and I also signed this article, the Charisocta sequence would be exactly coeval with the rise and fall of urbanism in the Indus Valley, so reaching a peak in the last centuries of the 3rd millennium BC and collapsing soon after, while the French mission working at Mergar had a completely different way, always on the base of the cross-cultural comparisons. They proposed that basically everything ended in Charisocta around the mid-3rd millennium BC. So the 2 views were completely not compatible. So who was right, who was wrong? Now, final evidence came from the excavation of Tepe Graziani, here outside Charisocta. Tepe Graziani was dug by an Iranian mission, the University of Zabul, Sistan, Baluchistan, and came to very interesting results, which can be summarized. You see, the excavation was very careful and stratigraphically oriented with a good set of radiocarbon dates. By the way, I would like to remember the name of Tepe Graziani, which in Farsi became something like this, Graziani. It was the name of the assistant of Tosi's excavation. This is Gabriele from Ismeo, when he was digging in the site with his name. Reconsidered all the excavation by Zabul University with a joint project of archaeological interpretation and writing, and we came to some interesting conclusions. Okay, this is a Harris diagram of period 3. This is the pottery of period 3, which is still painted, phases 4 and 3, and then period 4 on top. Now, the chronology was much more similar to the hypothesis of the French colleagues. And I can show you our results. We have to reconsider the chronology of Bronze Age Sistan in this way. We have a late period 2 ending around 2600, period 3 being included between 26, 2450, 2500, and period 4 not going beyond the limit of 2400 maximum. 2350 BC. So completely different from what we hypothesized originally, closer to what the French had suggested on the basis of their comparisons. Now, I want to mention that this new chronology depends completely on a big effort made by Barbara Elwing and Hassan Fazeli, who sponsored and carried out a program of general redating by radiocarbon date of the Bronze Age and I would say from the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age of ancient Iran. So we own entirely to these 2 colleagues the considerations that I am bringing now to you. You see the sequence is very coherent. Apparently, in the site of Tepe Graziani, life ended around 2400, 2350 maximum BC. Now, this is changing, obviously, everything. So who was wrong and who was right? This is the new sequence that seems to be valid now. When we compare Sistan, for example, to the sequence of Harappa in Pakistan, which is grossly comparable, okay? So we have a period 1 between 32 and 2800, period 2 phases 7 to 5, 28 to 2600, period 3, 26, 2450, and period 4 ending in this moment. So at present, and these are the corresponding dates of the Harappa sequence. So at present, it seems that we Italians were wrong, at least partially, but the French also may have been partially wrong. The Sistan sequence is earlier, but it does actually overlap with the beginning of the Indus phenomenon. I am informed by Enrico Scalone that new radiocarbon dates from the site of Charissotin itself seem to support this reconstruction. So apparently the urban phasing system does not go beyond the 2350 BC maximum, after which the urban sites were abandoned. So things in this perspective are quite different, okay? Not only because the datings are different, but also because after the excavation by Mansour Sajadi and other Iranian colleagues in Charissotin itself, period 4, it is not a period of delocalization, but seems to be an important period, the last period of full urban development, okay? This important article, which was published by Mansour Sajadi and his colleague Moradi, you see this large excavation in Charissotin. And this is the moment of full urban development. Now, the pottery they publish in this report belongs to a large extent to what we considered period 4, which now should not be considered the period of urban delocalization or urban crisis that we thought before, but a strong period of full urban development, if what has been published so far is right. Look at this incredible construction, which was published by Sajadi and Moradi. We have two buildings with a passage in between, with this system of semi-columns extending for a large side and fully including a lot of rooms, something very, very complicated, fully palatial, would seem, okay? The only comparison we have for this type of construction is this building excavated in Mergar by the French, with the same system of semi-column and dating to around 2500 BC. So more or less in accordance to what was found at Charissotin by our Iranian colleagues. Now, it seems that the urban life ended in Charissotin soon after 2300 BC. And some papers were published recently dealing with the climatic changes in the Hamun Ilmand, which fully support this. This article, for example, by Iranian colleagues, you see, discovered a peak of climatic crisis around 2200 BC, marked by extensive aeolian deposition in the lakes, very little organic material in the sediments, meaning the lakes were almost dead in the 23rd century. And similar conclusions were reported with this climatic crisis marked by the arrow by these other Iranian colleagues dealing with late Holocene climatic changes. So things are probably very different from what we thought, and we have to think in a different way. This is the reconstruction of what was the shape of the big lakes of the Hilman River in the Bronze Age, let us say around 3000 BC, in the time of maximum development of the lakes around Charissotin, and how they were in the early historical period, probably with phases of drying up intermediate between the two situations. Now, when we looked at the bones, the animal bones, from the site of Tepe Graziani, according to the excavation data of our Iranian colleagues, remember the excavation by students of Hassan Fazeli and the University of Zabul, the picture is very clear, okay? In Shari Sokte, you have a percentage of bovine bones, which is 80%. When you go to the latest period in Tepe Graziani, you have the bovine bones, which are only 2%, and 98% are goats. So we witness in the passage between the 25th to 24th century BC and the following period, a almost general extinction, if this is the interpretation we can propose, of bovine husbandry, and the transition to a husbandry based almost entirely on goats, which should reflect a strong phase of climatic change. Everything became arid, and possibly the lakes were dried or almost dried around 2300 BC. This is the normal sequence of the urban evolution of Shari Sokta as it was published by the Italians. And you see the things probably now should be imagined in a quite different ways. In yellow, here we have the impact of the so-called 4.2 kiloyears event in Sistan, a kind of climatic catastrophe, hitting the whole region here and determining here, you see, the urban collapse and the urban crisis, with two other episodes, which are probably two major firings of the city. One around 2800 BC, so the transition from period 2 and period 3, and the other one witnessed by the attack and the violent destruction of the burnt building of period 4 in Shari Sokta. So you see everything has to be moved 150, 200 years before. Now, I go to the discovery by the colleagues of Zabul University, which is the subject of this lecture. Okay, this is the site of Tepe Taleb Khan, or Yalda II. These mounds have two different names. Tepe Taleb Khan is found 20 kilometers south of Shari Sokta and has been excavated by the University of Zabul, by my colleagues Ali Hossein Kavosh, Reza Nasseri, and by my co-authors of this presentation. This is a drone view of the site with the excavated architecture. One of the problems of this site is that it was dug by different people in different years. So in a way, it was not very easy to put all the information together. And this was our main effort with Reza, with Ali, and the female colleagues I was mentioning before. So the different trenches here get different numbers. So these are in blue, the trenches that the archaeological survey of Iran is always digging for, delimiting the extension of the site for its protection. This is how now the architecture looks after conservation works. Here you see some parallel rooms and a system of central rooms with a kiln just in the middle. So the map of what has been excavated can be proposed in these terms. So there is a central house here with the largest room as a big kiln here. This is the access, and there are 1, 2, 3 rooms with narrow corridors divided by parallel rooms. Now, we know what these things are here. If you look at this room, okay, there is a passage. This means that this was a courtyard connecting two different rooms. We know this because of the excavations by Mansour Sajadi and Enrico Scalone in Shari Sokta itself. The rooms which have these passages of large mud bricks are usually courtyards. And here we have an open space with a big pit, 3.5 meters in diameter, completely covered by kagel, by plaster. Now, the general architecture can be reconstructed in this way. So a rectangular room with this corpse attached to them, made of parallel rooms. And this is a possible hypothetical reconstruction by my student Irene Caldana of how this building could have been looked like. Here, the structure was eroded. We don't know if there was another lateral room made of corridors, of parallel long corridor-like rooms, but it is possible actually. Now, what are these rooms? I think they are storerooms, and that the best match we can propose now is that these walls did not go up to the ceiling, but were something similar to the Middle Kingdom granaries that are perfectly documented by these models in Egypt. They are dated around 1800, 1700, so 2 or 3 centuries later than, or even more than the buildings we are witnessing here. But it is possible that these long parallel walls were covered with wooden tables, and people used to put wheat and other cereals and other agricultural products within them, and then covering them with wooden planks. So this is a possibility. The other one is that these walls were going up to the ceiling, but this cannot be proved or disproved. Here in these models of the Middle Kingdom Egypt, you see the activity of the scribes who are recording the arrival into the granary of lots of seeds and cereals. Now, this building was certainly an administrative warehouse, okay? And in this picture, you see the number of administrative indicators which were found in the different parts of the building. So we have a minor number of tokens, seal impressions, sealings, fragments of tablets found in these lateral rooms, 54 here, 22 here, very little in the entrance. Something was found here within what seems to have been the main house, but not less than 650 tokens, a fragment of ceilings, seals, seal impressions, and other indicators of administrative activities were found in this big pit, which was 3.5 meter wide and 2.5 meter deep. Okay, just to show how we worked in University of Zabul. And you see most of the work, I want to stress this, was made by women, very intelligent and perfectly ordered. Without them, nothing would have been possible. This is Ali Nasseri, the draftsman. So we put everything in order, classified everything. We ate a lot of tea, eating these incredible pastries. So everything was kept in a perfect order. In the same time, we were trying to have a typology and to put an order to this mess of craft indicators. Okay, we will see now very shortly bulle, tokens of different forms, miniature vessels, clay tags of different forms, closures for jars, and so on, and even a peculiar type of tablet. And in the same time, we were trying to figure out how some of these sealings and these sealing apparatuses could have been used in this peculiar assemblage. And we had seals. And these seals are so tiny, as you will see, and so simple in terms of iconography, that I think we can really speak about an implosion of the seal system taking place at the time of this warehouse, which is period 4, which is the 24th maximum early 23rd century BC, not later than this. So why these seals became so simple? This is one of the important questions of this research. So we came to a typology. We think that all these objects, they are about 700, 750 in all, were used in some kind of counting and administrative activities. We have pottery discs, jar closures, some of them stamped, most of them not stamped. We have a lot of bicones. So you will remember those I was showing before from the dumps of Charisocta, these biconical beads, so-called beads of unbaked clay. We have spheres and bullas containing tokens. We have tablets with hemispherical impressions. We have different type of tokens. We have a certain number of seals, a large number of miniature vessels. We have cylinders with impressed dots, perforated dots. We have the so-called crescents, which in my view are the most mysterious administrative indicators. And we have animal and human figurines. Now look at the work, that was done by our Iranian colleagues. More than half of the administration indicators which were found in the big pits were recorded with three-dimensional coordinates. I am not aware of anybody who has done such a precise excavation. I think the only similar case that I know was the excavation by Henry Wright in Tepe Farrukhabad, when he located in three-dimensional way all the content of the pit in which a lot of materials had been discarded. So here you see our 12 types of indicators and how they can be relocated within the pit, to the point that probably we are still waiting to do this analysis. We should be able to recognize different dumping episodes within this big pit. And we will try to understand something about the way in which different indicators were dumped in the same place in different moments. But really, my compliments to our Iranian colleagues of Zabul University for the care in which they saved this incredible archaeological context. And much we owe also to our draftsman, Mr. Ali Nasseri, who was really an artist. And this is a type of documentation which cannot be substituted, in my view, by any computer device. You see the beauty and the precision of his drawings. This is obviously a sealing with a seal impression from a chlorite seal. Now, I show you very shortly the different classes of indicators of administrative activities. We have different type of tokens, cylinders, spheres, some of them are more elaborated. This really looks like a mold for casting copper. We have cones. These are the bicones. We have rectangles, and so on and so on. So many different shapes. In the big pit were found something like 80 different discs and rectangles of pottery, which at this point I really believe were used for administration. We had many tags of clay, Umbecket clay, which were applied on different media like this, which I suppose could have been used like our paper tags when we are marking and qualifying different things in the same context. We have small hemispheres like this with imprint of vegetal structures on the back, maybe baskets and maybe cords. In this case, I am not sure, but very small, very often. You see, this is 2 centimeters wide. Look at this tag. This tag is double, so it has been counter-checked twice. On the rear, there is the imprint of a sack. And here you have a double sequence of nail impressions and possibly dots made with a stick. So a double system of checking, counter-checking, with a double system of impression. So in its simplicity, this administrative technology is also rather complicated as far as we can understand. Most of these finds are closures for small vessels. These are Umbecket clay closures, which retain the imprint of the pot. Some of these closures, also for larger jars, have been used more than once, and we have a stratigraphy of Umbecket clay put 1, 2, or even 3 times on the same lid for closing the jar. This is another closure. You see the imprint of the pot here. This is peculiar. It's a closure of a small vessel, okay, which always of Umbecket clay, which retained on the lower face the imprints of a stick, which was used to press within the vessel the content. Now, this content should have been something like honey or some wax, partially plastic, but capable to retain the impression. So I think that the impression of the clay lid, which was put on the vessel, retains the shape of a wooden stick or something like that, which was used to press honey or wax within the vessel. so that finally the jar stopper was looking like this. And we have fragments of closure of larger jars with a possible numerical signs. The seals and seal impression we found are very, very scarce. We do not have many seals and we don't have many seal impressions, meaning that whatever was open, stamped, closed in this unit was meant to go somewhere else. And I guess it was going to Charisocta or on the other side of the Sistan basin to Garden Rec. It is clear that they were still using some of the old seals of the early Bronze Age, because these are impressions of the same seal, should have been similar to this, a chlorite seal, like those which were in common use in period 2 in the first half of the 3rd millennium. This is a fragment of a copper seal. This is a fragment of a seal impression by a copper stamp seal. This is an exceptional sealing, completely different from the other, and I would like to draw your attention on, you see, this imprint from a bronze seal. It's the head of an eagle. These are 2 strings. This is the imprint here of a cloth which was put on the shoulder of the vase, and this is the imprint of a cover. The imprints are so neat that could have been, you know, a vessel covered with a stone lid or even in bronze. I don't know, it's very, very neat. But, okay, this is the structure. You see it was made in this way, 2 strings here at the contact with the neck of the closed jar. This is the lid. And the string was coming inside the sealing. Now, which type of seal is this? I think it is an Oxus seal. You see the shape of the eagle is comparable to many, many seals found in Turkmenistan and in Bactria. And it also reminds this seal found in Mohenjo-Daro, which has on this side an elephant with a part of an Indus inscription, and on the other side an Oxus eagle. It's a bicultural token of trade, probably for a long distance tradesman. These are other kind of sealings which were found in the pit. You see they are very small. This is not broken. It is complete in itself. And it has here the imprint of 2 strings. Clearly, a sealing of this type is not meant for being transported on long distance. I think it's a temporary sealing applied while the vessels were open, closed, the content was distributed, subdivided for short periods, keeping track of what was being made at the same time. So we have some of these small, not covering sealings, very partial. This is another one, okay? Also this one is not broken, it's complete in itself. Here you have the imprint of the lid of the vase and the imprint of the cords here. So these are first attempts at reconstructing them. And we have no sealings of the type commonly used on the pegs which close the doors. So whatever was happening in this warehouse, the doors were open. Everybody had access to the rooms. This is the only one we found which could have been a sealing applied onto a peg, but you see the size is very, very small. It doesn't look like a closure for a door. Let me remember that in Charisocta, thanks to the work of Marta Ameri, we know that seals were mostly linked, at least in the graveyard, to the representation of women. And you know, this is a gender bias. This is a reconstruction made by the Italians. And you see it is a man who is stamping the seal on the peg, but actually it is much more likely that women were doing this work. So a case of a gender bias that we should overcome. Now, other indicators of administration: a lamp with 1 or 2 dots in unbaked clay. This is the only thing which looks like a numerical tablet, 1 hole on one side, 2 on the opposite one. And we have cylinders with dots impressed, 1, 2, 3 broken cylinders. And let me remind that Enrico Ascalone has found in his excavation in Charisocta itself a room with something like 100 strips of clay with lines marked on them. They could have been something similar to these cylinders. He thinks that they were some kind of scales for linear measurements. I would also consider the hypothesis of counting devices in the context of this kind of different array of administrative approaches. Now, it seems that there was active a system based on the use of these terracotta balls, okay? Terracotta balls of this kind have been found in the warehouse, and we have ceilings, you see, which have hemispherical impressions, which apparently were made with these balls. I know that all this is very complicated, and the reason is that it was very complicated. But what's amazing about these ceilings with the sphere impressions is that the strings here are in positive, they are not in negative, meaning that these are not what was taken away from a closure, but they were lumps of clay which were pressed against ceilings to obtain a positive of the string. It's a counter-checking system for keeping accounting a number of operations. We never found anything like that. This is very similar. You see this fragment, you have the imprint of the spheres, and on the other side, the chord cast is positive, it is not negative, meaning that also the ceiling was pressed against another ceiling and marked with one or two of these terracotta spheres. So all this is totally new, and we have to try to understand this system, okay? This is another clay tag with multiple impressions of these terracotta balls, and you see the positive cast on the string on the interior. By the way, it was our draftsman, Alina Seri, who realized this. I did not understand this, but he was so careful and so brilliant in understanding the materiality of these small objects that he discovered this completely new system of keeping account. Now, most probably the same spheres were also used in these tablets. You see, tablets which have a double impression here and are empty on the other side, and then were snapped, like this one and this one. Some of them seems to have a dark paint in the holes, not all of them. The same tablets were found in the burnt building of Cherissoté. So this is also probably part of the system of checking accounting based on the use of these terracotta balls. And then we have the bulle, and we have a good number of bulle, which multiple impressions of the same terracotta balls. Some of them are empty, and as we will see, contain tokens. Some of them are solid, like this, and they have the same type of impression. This, for example, is an empty bulle, and the impressions are less deep here. This is a solid bulle, a solid one and an empty one, but always with this hemispherical impression from terracotta balls. Some of the best preserved bulle have another feature. You see this type of handmade incision all around the impression of the terracotta ball. This has also a passing through hole here. Another bulle with or without the circles around. You see, it is a completely new world that we have to understand. This is one of the best preserved bulle. You see, there is an imprint here. I am not sure how these impressions were made in this case. In this case, it doesn't seem to be a terracotta ball, could be something similar to a seal. We will come later to this point. Similar imprints of the same thing were also found in these ceilings in the burnt building of Cherissoté. And this is the interior of the ceiling, and you see the imprint of the tokens here, 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 one of which was still left inside. Now, this cannot be rattles because you see when the tokens were put inside, the thing was plastic. So there is no way this could be rattles of playthings. They are actually bulle with a double system of outer graphic notation. This is half of a bulle which was broken in plastic state and thrown to the ground, a fragment of a bulle which still retains another type of token, cylindrical here and conical one, another broken bulle here. You see, everything seems to have been manufactured and modified, open, closed, still in plastic state in very fast times. Now, this was found at Shaddad, And this was found at Mergar. And you can see it is the same system of administration, unifying a very wide territory from northern Baluchistan to Sistan and Lut. We have the same, apparently, administrative technology in this enormous area. It is important to note that this goes completely against the previous interpretation of period 4 at Charisocté as a period of localization, isolation, and so on. These people were using, or part of these communities were using the same administrative technology across a very wide area. These are fragments of bulle, broken and modified in plastic state. Half of an empty bulla without markings outside, while this one has multiple dots and was almost solid, like those found in Mergar, period 7. And then we had something like 60 or 70 of these biconical objects, which cannot be beads. And we really wonder if they were used in something like this, for making some counts. I have tried to have a closer look to the inner holes, but it is not so easy. Anyhow, they are not beads. They are all in unbaked clay. Some of them are hardened by fire, like this specimen, who is actually cracked while being fired. These are 4 defective specimens which show that these tokens, or whatever they were made in the warehouse and probably fired in the kiln, if you remember, that you have seen in the central room. So this unit was making its own tokens there. And this has important implications, as we will see, for the animal figurines. Probably part of these administrative elements were fired in this kiln. Now let's come to the seals. These are the seals which were found in the warehouse. They are very small, never larger than 2 centimeters. And the pattern is extremely, extremely poor, simple, limited to series of dots or circles. I couldn't believe to my eyes when I saw these seals, because they are, you see, 1.5 centimeters, miniature seals, made in clay, hardened by fire, not highly fired. They are not fired at high temperatures. And the patterns are all the same. We have 15 or 12 dots. These are other variations, concentric circle and dots. We have this other type of seal, which is a round without handle, apparently. On one side, we have multiple dots. Here we have a star. And it seems, and you see here, that at a certain point, the seal was broken or canceled with this type of groove. But again, people came back and replaced a dot in the groove. So with changing functions or changing characterization of this seal. And another outstanding feature of this material, look at this seal. They use it until the pattern was completely gone. So the important thing was not the pattern, but the act itself of sealing. Both this seal and this one is completely worn by the use, but still they use it. There was no individual characterization. People could not recognize who had stamped what. They worked as a group. Now, these seals probably, you see this one completely worn, left this type of sealings that were also found in the burnt building of Cheresokta. We found in Tepe Khan in the collection only 2 seal impressions made with this kind of sealings, meaning that once these pots or containers were sealed, they were sent somewhere else, probably to Cheresokta or Gardanreg, which is the other big city in Afghan territory. This is again the burnt building of Cheresokta. And you see here, this was brilliantly interpreted by Raffaele Biscione, who demonstrated that the structure of the burnt building is an ensemble. I mean, it's a group of individual units, each one endowed of its living rooms and storerooms. which came together, clustered together to form a palace. Okay, here in this color, you see the storerooms, and the storerooms for size are somehow comparable to what's seen in Tepe Khan. The distribution, let me say, the distribution of the different type of pots in the burnt building, which was studied by my colleague Raffaele Biscione, demonstrated clearly that in this room, these long rooms, people used to keep a large storage jars. So these are the storerooms. And we have similar storerooms in Tepe Khan. Now, let me take you even in a very distant place. We go to Gilund in Rajasthan, in India, 1,300 kilometers from Sistan, and look to what was found in Gilund. Long rooms. This is the excavation by Greg Pucel, Marta Meri, and other colleagues. Within the long rooms, we have some kind of cylindrical pits, and the pits are filled with seal impressions in clay. And we have, and this was noticed by Greg and Marta and the other colleagues, we have exactly the same type of seals which were used in Gilund, in Chanudar in Sindh, and Perak in Baluchistan. Very, very similar. Now, this is a seal in faience found in Taleb Khan. Look at the identity of the patterns with Chanudar and Gilund. So we are dealing with a similar system of administration using similar seals across an enormous area. And this too goes against the idea of the strict localization in the second half of the third millennium BC. Look again to this flower-like seals, the seal from Gilund, Chanudar, Tepe Khan, and the burnt building of Shari-Sokte. So we have the same seals again across extremely, extremely long distances. Now, the story is not limited to this aspect. In Gilund, Marta Meri, who published the seals, say that there were two types of seals and seal impression. The 100 sealings which were found in this pit, okay? But in the same administrative units, we also find some smaller seals, very simple, which she called the local style. And look at the similarity of these seals, the simplicity with those found in Taleb Khan, Shari-Sokte period 4, and in Bactria. Okay, this is the collection of Victor Sarianidi when he published his book with hundreds of seals, but mostly gathered on the surface of the site and in the local bazaar. This again is a seal from the burnt building of Shari-Sokte. You see we are witnessing something very, very similar. Look at the similarity from these Bactrian seals to those found in Tepe Khan and in Gilund. Now, another intriguing aspect, these seals are from Gonur, from the palace of Gonur, were just recently published in the big volume on the Oxus civilization, which was just edited by Nadezhda Dubova and Bertiglione. Definitely, these seals are the same which were found by Victor Serenidi in the bazaars of Bactria, and they are the same seals which are found in Sistan. So we are dealing with the same type of administration. With a little problem, the earliest possible dates from the palaces of Gonur is 2250 BC, meaning that the seals found in Taleb Khan in Sistan are earlier. So in this case, we have to think to something which from the south went to the north, if we have to believe to the radiocarbon dates so far published for the two different contexts, Sistan and southern Turkmenistan. Another problem, but the identity of the seals is beyond questioning. So should we really think that this system of administration developed in the south and went to the north? I also would like to point out the similarity between part of the Oxus architecture and what we found in Taleb Khan. You see this building from Adzikoué, the citadel, with these four appendixes, and probably here in Taleb Khan we had something roughly similar, a central unit and 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 rooms with the storerooms added to the corners. So possibly something similar. This is the area in which we should now consider this large interaction sphere during which Rajasthan, Sistan, Sindh, the Lut, and southern Turkmenistan could have been interacting in a large interaction sphere in the second half of the third millennium BC. Another type of indicator, miniature vessels. We have 40 of these miniature vessels, all of them broken, some of which are smaller than 1 centimeter, so definitely no practical use. They are all in unbaked clay, even though some of them were made by flaking the bottom of beakers. So we have an expedient approach to the production of these small containers. This is also made by flaking, this, and this. But as you can see, the shapes which are reproduced by miniature vessels are the dish, the bowl, and possibly a kind of closed small jars or beaker. Now, these are two well-known forms of the pottery of period 4 in Sherry-Sokta, closed forms, bowls, and dishes, which are probably the most common shape. So it seems that miniature vessels in Taleb Khan are reproducing forms, these forms from period 4 unpainted pottery of Sherry-Sokta. Look at this. This is a dish in unbaked clay, and this is the way in which it was intentionally snapped. Like a ticket at the cinema, if I can express myself like this. You take it and you break it. I think these miniature vessels were used in transactions to visualize for people the number of pots which are coming out, coming in and getting out of the warehouse. These tags are really mysterious for me. I am fascinated by them. I don't understand them. You see, they have the shape of an almond, flat on one side and triangular in section, and they included a cord. Okay, this is the tag. This is broken. They were folded on themselves in the center. The arc, which is made by the string, is different from the flat surface on which the ceilings were applied. I cannot understand their meaning or function. I originally thought that they could be used like this, but this is too fragile. I don't really believe that they were applied in this way on pots, so I am very uncertain. They could have also been put on pergaments or something like that. I have no idea. This is a cast. You see the twist of the cord. The thickness is about 3.5 to 3 millimeters. And let's come to the figurines, okay? For the first time, we have a context in which we have 184 figurines in the same place, clearly linked by some kind of functional process, okay? So now I need a little bit of your attention. Let's go to the numbers of these figurines. We have 137 animal figurines, which is about 75%, and about 50 human figurines, which is roughly 25%. So 1 out of 4 figurines is human, the other 3 are animals. Among the animal figurines, we have about 40% which are bulls, and 20% which are sheep, which is a very, very high percentage when compared to the normal figures in Sherry-Sokta, okay? And the rest are more difficult to determine. It takes a little bit of time before learning how to distinguish bulls from sheep. It is not so obvious. Most of the figurines are fragmented, but look now in this table, which figurines are fired and which figurines are unbaked clay, okay? So 90% of the animal figurines, so this means the bulls and the sheep, are unbaked. And only 10% have the signs of very strong exposure to fire. When we move to human figurines, the situation is the contrary. 75% are terracotta, and little more than 10% are unbaked. So it is clear that animal figurines were unbaked and human figurines were unbaked, were fired purposefully, and were in terracotta, okay? And there is another important factor. While in Sherry-Sokta, 50% of the figurines are female and 50% are male, here we have only male figurines. There is not a single female figurine in all the collection. Now, 35% of the animal figurines are manipulated and broken while in plastic state. This is, for example, is an animal which is beheaded and was pulled. You see the cracks. This was perforated with some kind of point and warped, modified in plastic state in the hand. This was snapped, like tore apart like a piece of paper. This was closed in the hand until it completely lost its shape. You see here the crack lines after being beheaded. This also has been beheaded and then kept clutched in the fist. In my experience, I had never seen in Charisocta such a high percentage of figurines which were damaged still in plastic way. I don't remember a single one. Now, my colleagues who excavated the site probably have better records and information than I have, but I do not remember to have seen anything like this in Charisocta. Okay, this is a sheep which was, again, broken in two, and then the rest of the body was transformed in a kind of pastiche and stuck again on the rear of the body of the animal. So I believe these animal figurines were used for accounting, for transferring animals, maybe also for recording the subdivision of the meat of animals which were killed there. So now the interesting question is, which relationship is there between the parts which are missing of the animal figurines and the bone record, the skeletal record? Do we have certain parts which are not present there? So now, as far as I know, Marjan Mashkour is studying these materials and will help us to understand if there is any, visible pattern in the distribution of the animal parts, which can be contrasted or, linked to what we see they were doing with the figurines, okay? But what about the human figurines? Now, this is a sheep, you see, or a goat. Now, I always wondered what could have been the meaning of these human figurines, very strong arms, no head. And they are in terracotta, so they are not meant to be subdivided differently for the animal figurines. So I think that we could consider the possibility that these figurines were used for organizing people, for organizing corvées. And the meaning of these strong arms is that they refer to strong workers, Gardan Koloft Kargar, to people which had strong arms, no head, and could be used for organizing squads of workers. And this would make sense and would fit with the general evidence of this warehouse. This could also explain why here we have only male figurines and not women figurines. Remember that here we are 20 kilometers far away from Charisocta in the middle of the rural hinterland of the big city. This is how we are now organizing the entire documentation. These are the drawings of my student, Irene Caldana. And so we will provide a complete catalog and complete description with good photographs and good drawings of all these figurines. Some of which are also very elaborated, like this one. Others are much less characterized. So, coming to a conclusion, what we are witnessing in Tepe Talebkan is the survival of a very ancient, I would say, late Chalcolithic approach to accounting, made of bulle, of tokens, made of very simple numerical counts, like clay tags, something which gets closer to our concept of numerical tablet, but not really so well developed. The impression is that people was counting things coming from a rural hinterland to a kind of centralized administrative unit, which was outside the city. So a kind of decentralized centralization. In the core of the rural territory, they were using very ancient technologies, which most probably continued to be in use for thousands of years. And this also can help us understanding why these civilizations did not move to a centralized single system of recording, permanent recording on tablets with a writing system, okay? So I don't know how many of you are aware of these important vessels. It is kept in the National Museum of Naples. It is dated to the early 4th century BC. and shows the preparation of the war campaign of the Persian army under Darius against the Greece population. Here you see the fight between the Persian and the Greek on the neck of the vessel. But here, what is relevant for us, the preparation of the war campaign. Okay, here you have the tax collectors for Darius, and he's receiving goods for preparing the war against the Greeks. And he's holding a tablet covered with wax, on which it is written talenta, which means 1,000. And here on the table, you have different letters of the Greek alphabet, and we have tokens here. So he's putting tokens under each single letter, of which M here stands for 10,000. Phi stands for 1,000. H, which will be A in Greek, stands for 100. Delta D for 10. And P here would stand, archaic P would stand for 5. So the number that possibly they are writing is something like 1 million. Let me just see. Okay. 1,345,000. Okay, so an enormous number. This shows in a very effective way that also a royal administration could continue. I don't know how realistic is this and how much it is a Greek projection or it is actually a witness of a Persian system in the Achaemenid period, but I find it very, very interesting how the token system could be continuously in use for something like 4,000 years. So now we can posit, more than finding easy solution to all this new evidence, we can put new important questions. Thinking to the small seals, the spheres, and the bulle found in Shaddad, in Baluchistan, and now also in Sistan, is this the import of a northern technological apparatus, or the direction of the spread, the diffusion of similar technological systems was the other way? How can we explain the spread of the similar approach to accounting and storage practices across thousands of kilometers from Turkmenistan to the Lut Desert and almost to the edge of Maharashtra in India? What is the meaning of a warehouse like this, an agency, well organized, capable of dealing with different systems of recording and accounting, but set 20 kilometers afar from the city, which probably was the main market for the entire region, and some points which we can accept as established. So the main activity in the warehouse was opening and closing vessels, checking and rechecking the transfers, vessels which were basically small rather than big jars. In the warehouse, we have much more seals than seal impressions. So probably jars which had been resealed were exported somewhere else, I would guess, either to Gardanreg or to Cherisocte. The fact that there is no individual marking of the seals means that the group of who worked in the warehouse was a compact pyramidal group where everybody in the team had the same responsibility and they knew each other and they worked for somebody else. The doors were not closed, meaning that the access to the rooms apparently, or the banks, as we have seen in the possible reconstruction, if we have to follow the model of the Middle Kingdom Egyptian granaries, the access to these infrastructures was not restricted. The lack of individual characterization of the seals suggests a kind of implosion of the traditional early Bronze Age sealing system, even if people at the time probably continued to use episodically the old seals. The fact that the pots were open, checked, and sealed was more important than the personal responsibility. Bulls, sheep, and goat figurines were manipulated and fractioned while they were still in plastic state, possibly to visualize the sharing of meat, the distribution of animals, distribution of meat. But this needs to be checked with the actual record of bones, considering that we are on top of an elevated site, so we are not sure that we really will be able to to study the real dumps, which probably were also outside the limit of the mound. Human figurines of male workers, perhaps kept for visualizing and organizing teams of work. The recording of the transaction and all the information management was contextual, impermanent, and probably happened in a very fast way. So the overall evidence suggests a corporate group which was rooted in external territory, who managed its economic resources before the transaction moved to the market of the main city. Now, this is very, very conjectural, and we have to think. You see, this is a cash recorder of the 19th century. It's made of pieces which are very, very similar to each other. And once you have lost this order, it's very difficult to go back to what actually happened in this workshop. I think the situation is similar. We have the elements for different types of accounting, different type of transaction, but to understand exactly what happened there would have been as difficult as to reconstruct an apparatus like this, having at our disposal only a few cogwheels and some cylinders. So we have to be, I would say, realistically pessimist about the possibility of recognizing this type of administration. And finally, I would like to close with this image. Okay, this is an elephant. It is the story of the blind man which touched the elephant, and everybody gets a different impression of what they are touching. The man who's touching the tooth says it's hard, it's polished. The one who touches the tail says, you know, it's like a snake, but it is furry. And the other who touches the belly says it's a big wall, very rough, and so on. This story, by the way, was a Sufi and a philosopher of medieval Iran. So thanks to you for your patience in listening to all this. And thanks to my Iranian colleagues